and maybe it's because I'm still young, but I am pretty ruthless when it comes to the people that I have in my life.
Yeah.
But only insofar as it will continue to add value, and more so that it is aligned with where I want to go. It is my hope that both of us are better off. It's not just like Alex taking. I would say you shouldn't be friends with me if I'm only taking from you. And so the hope is that the exchange makes both of us better. I remember thinking like, is this it? You know what I mean? Because I was 21 at this point. I'd graduated college. I had the good job. I had my own condo that I had bought because I'd saved the money. And I was looking out over the high rises, and I was like, is it just more of this? It got to the point where I was so incredibly depressed that I wanted to not wake up every day. So I would go to bed hoping that I wouldn't wake up. The conclusion that I had to come to for me to make this move, despite my father, who had a tremendous amount of influence over me, especially at a younger age, was I can either die to him or I can die to me.
His net worth was over $100 million by the age of 32. He is Alex Hormozi, and he's my guest. And this conversation is about the worth of education, our self-worth, mindset, and so much more. You're going to love it. Let's get right to it. Here is my conversation with Alex. All right, Alex, I talk about education all the time on the show, mainstream media, and because I'm so fired up about it, and I'm looking at the data, and I know you talk about it on your YouTube channel and in multiple places. Bottom line is, I'm not sure it's a great investment anymore, and I think it's in danger, higher ed, of becoming extinct. When you look at enrollment numbers are down big time. You contrast that with, of course, tuition up, student loans up. And I want to know what you think about that as you look at this new economy. And you talk about the new economy all the time. Where does college sit as it relates to relevance?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think one of the easiest ways to think through it is to think like first principles of why was college established to begin with, and then going backwards from there. And so I think for most people, they say college was established to increase the quality of the workforce, so increase skilled labor so that we could be more competitive as a nation. And there was kind of different tiers of workers. There was tiers of workers who didn't have a college degree, tiers that did. College at that time, from a price to value perspective, was significantly higher. So price what you pay, value is what you get. And so the return on the investment of both time and money still made sense for people to forego income for most people for that period of time. I know that at Ramsey, you encourage people to do both, which I would encourage as well. Like, don't stop making money if you have the option.
That's right.
But the idea that you have an investment of time and money, and then you can make up for it more later, which makes complete sense. And I give a little analogy to this, which is a friend of mine has a daughter. She's in high school, and she started working at a bowling alley for minimum wage. And he said, hey, you should take a phlebotomy certification. It takes a weekend. It's $500, and you can start making $25 an hour. Now, for her to save up the money to then spend the weekend, it might take her 8 weeks to save the money versus borrowing $500 from dad, doing the certification and being able to pay dad back in a week, and then making 7 more weeks of basically net profit, or whatever you want to call it, increased earning capacity. That's a micro example of what college was supposed to do. The difficulty is that now there is no discrepancy between what someone can earn with or without a college degree, but there is a very real cost in both time and money. And so I think that is the fundamental discrepancy of why college no longer is worth it. And then there's the additional risk of, if you take on college debt, student loans, you can't bankrupt out of them. You're stuck with them forever, and you're stuck with them forever at a lower or insignificantly raised earning capacity overall.
Yeah. And I want to stay in this lane, because when I get to talk to people like you, different viewpoints, worldview, you're younger than I am as well. I'm just curious what your generation, what do you think is the distaste that parents have with trades?
I think everything comes down to status. And so I would imagine that most parents want to be able to say that they did a good job of being parents. And so they use their children as a proxy for how good of people they are. And so if they can go and say, hey, my kid is doing X, Y, and Z, it is perceived as high prestige versus my kid is an electrician, even though he makes more than being a social media manager at insert random mid-market company. They would get more prestige from social media because it's white collar versus blue collar. But from a dollars and cents standpoint, from a return on investment standpoint, and arguably from an enjoyment of life standpoint, that person who might be inclined to be an electrician or a plumber or whatever might actually like that more and have a better life. But I think it's selfishness at its core, is that they're putting their own needs rather than the needs of their children first. And most of them are doing so without knowledge. I would say that's the vast majority. And then I would say the other, I don't want to say vast majority, maybe like half are there. And then
Sure.
the other portion is parents who are just afraid of messing something up. And it is always safe to go with the herd, because I mean, that's human behavior. If you have a check mark box on your purchases says, this is what everyone does, or 89% of people choose this option, most people feel safe doing it because other people walked on the ice. And so you feel like you're not going to go down. Right. So I feel like that's evolutionary. And so people go with herd behavior, even though the reason college originally was started was to create a price to value discrepancy in terms of value additive to the people who went through it. And that discrepancy no longer exists. It transformed from being a value additive to a cultural norm. And so people continue to do it as a cultural norm, not because it adds value, but because they've always done it that way.
That's exactly right. So I've got a ninth grade boy and a junior right now. And my ninth grader goes to we're very blessed to be able to go to a private school. So the other night, my wife says to me, Alex, she goes, hey, it's college seminar 101 something or other for the ninth grade. She goes, are you going? And I'm like, I'm not going. I'm not going. This is part of the problem. We're putting ninth graders and their parents in a room. And we're creating, again, more pressure, right? And having conversations about college with a 14-year-old who is just like every other 14-year-old in the world. He has temporary insanity most of the time. He changes his mind all the time. What are they doing? He's 14. It's okay to change your mind 50,000 times. And I bring this up to you because you've got a lot of young people watching your channel. You've been tremendously successful. And we've created this homogenized view of success that has a lot to do with your test scores, the diploma, and everything else, when in all reality, the diploma doesn't guarantee anything at all, other than in some jobs and career paths, it does get you the ticket in the door. But that's increasingly less and less of a reality.
I think Gary Vee said something that was really profound. He said, I get it. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, you need the degree. He's like, but what about the 95% of people that aren't in those 3 to 10 buckets
That's right.
of career paths that are the easy ones to name off the top of your head? What about them? You know what I mean? What about the 2 million, plus salespeople that exist? You know what I mean? Just in the United States alone, like what about those people? And so, yeah, I think everything comes down to price to value discrepancy and cultural norms. And I think that the price to value discrepancy, I don't think there's really an argument for it anymore, with the exception of, like you said, the ticket of entry to a potentially higher path, which then makes the argument that it's really the higher education above the 4-year degree that's the thing that's conferring the value. And you only have to do this as a mandatory cost, for lack of a better term, to get in. And then for everyone else, the cultural norm argument of, if they're going to take a normal job, there is no reason to incur 4 years and the
that's correct
bankruptless debt.
Yeah, well, let's just look at large companies like Google and other tech companies that are hiring young people, and they don't even care what the degree is, whether they have one or not, because they're training them for the job. I love the story you tell in one of your videos about your 19-year-old neighbor. I think
I was just going to tell it.
Yeah, go ahead, because this is great. Here's a kid who's literally in the middle of this scenario that we're talking about. Probably has well-meaning parents. He's 19. Yep. He wants to be successful. He's blessed to be your neighbor. And boom, one day he goes, hey, Alex, I want to make a bunch of money.
So he was what I would consider an above average but not exceptional student. He did probably a 3.5, something like that student. He got into Pepperdine, which is a expensive school in Southern California. He did a semester there. He didn't like kind of the social programming aspect of everything that was being pushed down his throat. And then beyond that, the big realization that he had was that he just didn't like this. And he still felt like all of his time and all of his energy was going into watching YouTube videos about how to make money. And so we had this long walk. I remember it was almost 2 hours where we walked around the neighborhood and kept walking until I wanted him to make this decision. And so what it came down to for him was that he took, because he had parents who were well-to-do and could afford to put him in this college. But for him, it was a safety net, was that he had an excuse to not succeed at his entrepreneurial desire because he had a 4-year buffer. Mm-hmm. And so I told him, I was like, you will always be able to go back to college. They will always take your money.
Oh,
they will have no problem taking your money, right?
That's right.
But what I want to do is talk about a tale of two Jacobs, right? And his name was Jacob. And so I said, so Jacob number one, you go and you finish your Pepperdine in 4 years with a 3.2 business degree. And I was like, let's be real. The world doesn't need a 3.2 business degree. And I'm not listening to anyone from Pepperdine with a 3.2 business degree on how I'm going to grow my business. Let's be real, right? So you're going to get some whatever job for $40,000 to $60,000 a year right out of college, 4 years from now with $200,000 in debt. That's where you're at. To your parents, at least, if you want to pay them back. In scenario 2, I said, you have 4 years. And what I told him to do is, I said, just join our front end sales team. I was like, just dial for dollars. It's the lowest tier job. I said, you will learn so many skills on how to talk to people, how to work longer hours, how to work with adults, people who are doing this as actually their main source of income, et cetera. And I said, I promise you that 4 years from now, if you did nothing else, you'll have saved $200,000 in not cost.
Yep.
You'll have made $160,000 because you'll have made 4 times 40. If you make no improvements in your life, you don't level up. I was like, but you do have the decent shot at moving up in the company, gaining skills. And then if we do an apples to apples comparison, and right now this kid is 2 years into that path where he decided to quit, despite all of his friends and the parents, and kudos to his parents for they've been very supportive of this, which I think a lot of people don't have.
And when you say quit, I just want to clarify, quit college.
Okay. He dropped out after his first semester.
Okay, right.
I had to talk to his parents 3 or 4 times they're like, hey, I want you to know you have a lot of influence over our son.
Yeah.
And I really want you to use that. I was like, I'm not going to screw your son over. Like,
right,
I promise.
Right.
He's in good hands.
Hey, let me, could we stay here for a second? This is so good. What were the biggest fears you had to address with his parents?
They didn't want him to be seen as less than or less capable. And they felt like, because of their upbringing, their societal norms, whatever, they felt like college was still a viable plan B, or it made his trajectory into the workforce less risky and more guaranteed, as they perceived it, to getting a job. And I had to explain to them that if you have Jacob number 1 and Jacob number 2 4 years from now, and you tell me a guy's been working on a sales floor for 4 years versus a guy who graduated college for 4 years, I was like, there's no businessman that I know who would take, liberal ed's Jacob 3.2 business degree over the guy who's been banging phones and made, 40,000 phone calls over the last, 4 years, whatever. Wow. And so I think once they understood that he was better off, and for them, the money wasn't the significant part. Sure. They wanted to risk adjust his trajectory, the trajectory of his career. Yeah. And I explained that the risk adjusted return on the value additive, like on the skills he would acquire over the 4 years, that's right, because he wanted to do business, and that was because he wanted to get into business and make money. The best way to learn business is to get into business. That's right. Well, so he's 2 years in with you now. Yeah. And how's he doing? So he's got $250,000 saved up. Wow. As a 19-year-old. He worked his way off the call floor as the top setter, the dialer, outbound dialer. And then we have 3 sales teams, not to get too in the weeds here, but there's 3 tiers of salesmen. He worked his way up to the top of the bottom tier, worked his way up to the top of the second tier, and became second highest in the top tier over the span of 18 months. And I told him when he got the job, I said, I can't even give you the job. I can get you the interview. I said, it's up to the salesman. He manages his own team. You have to show him. And the same thing with his career path. And I would always check with the managers. I was like, hey, I want to make sure that he's not getting any special treatment. They're like, if anything, we give him worse treatment because he's young and they're like, but his numbers are his numbers. Like, they're like, he sounds like a man on the phone. Wow. And so that was one of the things that he had to overcome too, is like, and he's now selling stuff. He's selling, $30,000, $50,000, licenses to gym, like basically like gym franchise, the easiest way to say it, to grown men. And so the amount of maturity and the amount of how many people have hung up on him on the dialing side, that he had to learn how to overcome that and position him and hold the frame and all these things that you talk about. That guy 4 years from now compared to the guy who was studying Aztec literature, like, who are you going to hire? Yeah. All right. So what you're essentially describing is this young man may take a 4-year gap. Like, a gap year is like a horrible thing to say to a parent. I've done it at live events before. I was in front of 2,000 people recently, and a dad stood up and said, hey, Ken, I got to ask you a question about my son. He's thinking about a gap year. And I think he thought I was going to give him some advice how to talk the kid out of it. And I was like, do it. Just do it. Who cares? As long as he's working, he's active, he's exploring, he's trying. I think it's so important. And I want to stay here with this 19-year-old because for my audience, they'll get where I'm going here. I'm always talking about the intersection of talent, what you do best, passion, what you love to do, and then mission, what motivates us. And so I'm curious if this young man has told you
now having worked for you for 2 years, is he beginning to see a clear mountaintop, or is he still just saying, I want to get as much experience as possible to figure out one day what the business is? How far along in his vision is he? I'm curious.
I would say in his entrepreneur trajectory, he's so green. It's
of course.
It's
right.
But in terms of, because transparently, he worked out with me. So
sure.
I had a big garage gym, and he would work out with me after school every day.
Right.
And so he had 2 years of he had a lot of time of one-on-one mentorship of reframing how he saw the world.
Yeah.
And so he understands that this is a chapter in his life to gain one plume in his cap of, I understand sales.
Got it.
And so he also understands, and I've been very clear with him. I was like, you need to understand all the departments of a business in order to run one. So he understands his personal finances, because he's followed what I said. He doesn't spend money. He splits a place with 4 guys, and the kid's making $25,000 a month.
Yeah.
Splits a place with 4 dudes, and he's got no girlfriend, everything he owns in cash. But I was like, you still don't know marketing. So you need to learn how to market. That's going to be the kind of the next. And he started to do this. So he's making content now. He's making shorts. He's made his first YouTube video this week. So he's learning the content game. He's learning how to market, how to position himself. He's going to have to learn delivery, which is probably the next thing after that. And so he understands that he's on a journey to acquire skills so that when he does choose to deploy them, he'll have the capital and he'll have the experience in order to increase the likelihood of success. Because when I was explaining to his parents, I said, I want him to start cold calling, because if he knows how to turn a phone into money, he will never go hungry for the rest of his life.
That's right.
For the rest of his life, if he wants to start a business, he's got a phone and he's got numbers, and he can find business. And he can take that skill to any business, and any business owner will pay him handsomely to go get them business.
Well, I got to tell you, and I think that's what's even more important than the ability to make money, and I think you're absolutely right, is by putting him on a cold call floor and a phone where he's just banging on the phone. Let me tell you something. You learn to overcome rejection, which is maybe the most valuable skill of any successful person. I don't care what walk of life you're in. If you learn how to handle rejection, that's huge, because we are so scared of it, the sting of hearing no. And boy, you've cured him of that pretty quick. And then I would also say that this is where grit comes from.
Totally.
I mean, real grit. I mean, it's the ability to go, I'm going to do hard things for the purpose of learning how to do hard things.
Yes.
Like I'll tell you, I got 3 kids, and I don't want to sound like a middle-aged old guy, but I probably am already. I am middle-aged. My generation, I'm Gen X. One of the things that is concerning about me is how we have removed negative feelings from our kids' lives. We're so concerned about our kids feeling good, we've forgotten to teach them how to actually be good. But you can't be good, Alex, unless you suck. I don't know how you get to be good at anything without sucking in the first place. Is that fair to say that that's our greatest failure to these kids these days?
I feel like you're preaching the gospel of Mosey Nation. That's it is. You must suck before you are good.
There's no way around that.
And to your point about the ascribing a negative or positive label to an emotional state is, in my opinion, the biggest plight of the youngest generation right now. Is that we want to draw a line and say any feeling below the line is bad. It's like looking at the sky and saying sunny days are good, rainy days are bad, but they are both required for the earth to continue, right? And as humans, the human experience is the breadth of the experiences, not just everything to the left of the line, which is why you have these over-medicated kids who think that any bad feeling is bad, or rather any feeling that they would prefer not to have as something that they should not have or should not experience, rather than a corrective tool to get them back on the path that they want to be on. Like, this is 100%, like I could, and I just want to hit on a point that you said earlier, because it's really profound for me and the audience that I have, which is, I believe that there are 3 main things that people have to develop. You've got skills, you've got traits, and then you've got beliefs about the world. You've got perspectives. Yeah. And so, you are limited, or at least in my view, entrepreneurs are limited by one of those 3 at any given moment. So if you have impeccable character and you have great beliefs about the world, but you have no skills, you will only be able to, provide value to the level of your skills. Now, once you add a ton of skills to your tool belt, the sky's the limit. The flip side, you've got tons of skills, right? But you don't have the character trait of focus. right? Like you can't stick with something for a long time. That's your grit that you were referencing earlier. Or you can't take rejection. That's a trait, right? And so it doesn't matter how skilled you are or what you believe to be possible in the world and what you want to allocate your time and energy and resources and skills towards, you won't be able to accomplish it because you don't have the character trait to get there. And so I see it as those three paths. And so to Jacob's education, learning the phones was a very small percentage of what he was learning during that period of time. He learned discipline. He learned how to show up on time. He learned how to have a uniform. He learned how to talk to adults. He learned how to hold a frame. He learned from a belief perspective, he learned that you could sell stuff for tons of money before he could adopt, I'll say this, hopefully as people understand me saying it, a poverty mentality around money. And hearing like $1,000 is a lot of money. Well, to a 16-year-old maybe, but also sometimes to a 40-year-old. And it's sad to me that it is a lot to the 40-year-old because they learned that. They didn't know that. They were taught that it was a lot of money. Yeah. And I wanted to get to him before he would learn the wrong lessons. And so he can now say $100,000 over the phone and not break a sweat because he doesn't have worldviews that I had to unteach him. He was blank slate. And so anyway, he learned a lot of things, and the traits and the skills of just how to pick up a phone and get someone to say yes and move forward was the minority of the things that he learned in that experience.
Yeah. This young man's working hard for you. He's busting his butt. Oh, we don't know if he has a passion for sales. He might now. He discovered it because you made him do it, but he might not. He's doing it. If he doesn't have a true passion for sales, like connecting with people and getting them a solution, he's doing this because he's got maybe a passion for solutions and maybe a business around that. And that's great. All right. But here's my point. It's that as he is experiencing, and you have put him through some real pain in a good way. He's had to learn rejection, how that feels, and busting his butt and competing and losing, all the things that you've discussed. My point is that in the doing hard things, embracing the suck, as we've been talking about, I feel that inside of that, we begin to discover along the way, oh, I did this just because it was hard. But along the way, I found that I would do this, whether it was hard or not. Like if I did some hard stuff, now it became easy. But now I find that I want to keep doing hard stuff because of the pleasure I get from doing the hard stuff, the work itself. And what I mean by that is when I have a 12-hour day tomorrow, 12 hours. I'll do 3 hours of the show, video shoot, all kinds of stuff. I'll be mentally like, you know what I mean? It's going to be a hard day. But I do it because I have found pleasure in helping other people relieve pain because of my own pain when I went through some of my career crisis stuff. That's the point that I'm making. It's that in just getting kids out there and doing stuff, they're going to begin to find pleasure in this thing called work, which has been created as a 4-letter word, like work has to suck, that I only work for money. I'm just curious your thoughts on that, because you're talking a lot about work and career success, but this idea of a connection between some of our pain and pleasure.
Well, I'll say a statement that we say a lot in our community, which is your work works on you more than you work on it. And so I believe that we were meant to work.
Yes.
We were built to work.
Yes.
And I had a very a rock bottom experience, which was in a rock top situation. So I'll tell this to give context. So last year we exited 3 of our companies for a sizable amount. And during that year, I wasn't really allowed to work because I couldn't show that I was doing anything in the business. We also couldn't make any big changes because you don't want to change stuff during a transaction, et cetera. And so during that year, I basically had to take off because I'm a big believer in not starting new things until like you have finished the thing that you are working on. And so I pretty much had to sit idle. And it was one of the more depressed years of my life because I had to just sit on my hands and do nothing. And I realized the blessing that it is so much worse. It is worse to not be able to work than to be forced to work.
Yes.
If I had to pick, being unable to work is worse than being forced to work. And so I think if we extrapolate that out, we learn to derive pleasure from work in a job well done. And I think that the gain or pleasure that you get is proportional to the pain that you experienced to achieve the outcome or accomplishment. If something comes easy, it means less to you.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if we want to have these meaningful experiences as humans, then we must bear the price of that because there's no way we can cheat it. What we put in is what we will get out. Like what we reap is what we sow. And so if we want to have the big reap, we have to sow big. And so I think that's what people want, is they want the big reaping without the big sowing.
That's absolutely right.
And you cheat yourself because you don't get the emotional experience of the fulfilled victory without the grit, the suffering that leads to it.
Yeah. I want to do just a brief breakdown. We're going to cover several things, but I do want to walk you through the methodology that we teach on the show so people can see it uniquely to your story, and that is talent. What would you say are your top 2 or 3 talents?
I think I'm good at persuading.
Okay. Persuasion. I like that.
I think that's one.
Okay.
Probably the biggest one. I hate to use this term, but I'm pretty good at resource allocation. And so what I mean by that is, if we have limited resources and time and money and bandwidth or attention, and we have unlimited options that the world presents us, we have to learn to say no to 99.99% of things truly, because options are unlimited, resources are. And so the ability to allocate resources, I think for me, has allowed me to move through things quickly.
Wow. So I want to take a shot at rewording that, not because it needed to be reworded, but to go a little deeper. Am I hearing you say that you have got a natural ability to dive into the complex and simplify, and then also execute on it? So there's a little bit of both there. You're able to analyze and then be decisive. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
So you got the ability to analyze, okay, I've got limited resources and I can quickly take complex and simplify and go, we got to go here.
That's what I think
that's wild. Yeah.
I've been able to move quickly through life because I've been able to allocate my energy into the highest leverage activities, the things that I get the most return on for my time.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Okay. So let's go into passion, the work that you love. If there's 2 or 3 roles and or tasks, what would you say that I love this, Ken? If I'm doing this, I get excited thinking about it and I get lost in the middle of it. What would you say those passions are?
I love learning, which I do through teaching. So this is a realization I had about myself. I used to say that I love teaching, and I thought more about it. And it's actually, I don't love teaching. I love learning, and I use teaching as a vehicle for learning.
Right. You love learning in order to dispense.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I want to learn more about sales, I say I'm going to go write a book on sales because I know I'm going to learn a whole heck of a lot more. So I say, like, if I'm doing that, I'm in a good space.
Okay.
That is transparently the majority of what I do in general. And talking to people, that's what I enjoy doing. So whether it's talking to the team, whether it's talking to our portfolio CEOs, whether it's talking to a camera to talk to an audience, like that is what promotion, if you want to put that as a different bucket.
Yeah.
If you had teaching and promotion, those are probably the 2 things. If I have a hat inside the business, it would be CMO.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be CEO. I actually think my wife she is the CEO. She's the chief executive officer. And I have a function. That is what I do. She's much better.
I think it makes sense with what you just said as CMO, because you really love the communicative work, connecting with people, telling stories, that teaching, instructing, and guiding. I mean, as I watched some of the videos, it was fun for me because I've told people many times, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be coaching basketball somewhere, because I just love coaching. And really what that is, it's about connecting with people and helping them get from here to here, if you're going to simplify it. And when you talk about the young neighbor and just, here's a kid that wanders into your gym or however that happened, and you decide, that's really the heart of a mentor and a coach, that guide, if we want to choose one word. I love that. All right, so last piece of it. So talent's what we do best. Passion is what we love to do. The last piece of a person's purpose statement is mission. What results matter to you? So what fires you up when you think about everything you're doing? What results really give you the juice?
So this is so timely that you're asking these questions. So I recently, after 10 years, have just redefined this for myself. And it was something that I'm almost ashamed to say what it was before, but I'll share it.
Why?
I defined my self-worth through my net worth for the vast majority of my career, despite knowing that it is not the best way to do it. I know that was still true for me. I could say whatever I wanted. I know that was still true. And so recently, because I'm a big believer that the measuring stick that we choose to use is the filter that we decide what paths to take throughout our life, and we measure them against this lens of, will it help me accomplish this measuring stick, right? And whether it's to glorify God, whether it's to be a good parent, whatever the thing is. And for me, it was, will this build my net worth faster than something else, right? And it has worked for that goal. That being said, when I look at my 85-year-old self back into today, I don't think that man would care if he had 50% more net worth. And so I feel like my decision calculus has recently begun to change. And so for me, I have defined this, and I'll try and break it down, as, will this build goodwill? So
love that.
Now everything that I do is, will this build goodwill? And the decision calculus for that is, it can only build, no neutral moves. So if something's just neutral, like it doesn't detract from it, but it doesn't build it, then I don't do it. And so I think about brand equity, goodwill, as unmonetized value. And with my prior decision-making thesis, I would have to die on my deathbed with no goodwill, because I would have monetized every aspect of goodwill that I had in the marketplace to maximize my net worth. Like if we just take it to the natural extreme of me on my deathbed, having fulfilled my measuring stick, right, that I had prior to this.
How do you define goodwill? I want you to go deeper on that. I think people want to know. They're like, come on, Alex, what is goodwill? What's the measurement?
It's giving in excess of what you take. And so if I give to somebody and I ask for nothing back, I have goodwill. I've deposited an IOU into the world.
Okay.
And I would like to die with a surplus of IOUs.
So does that mean, as an investor, you're going, that's the measuring stick? It's not how much I'm going to exit for. It's, can I come beside a business that needs my help, or someone like me, and I know I can make their dream bigger? Is that what you mean when you say give more than you? Is that what you're talking about?
I would love to die with a tombstone that said, here lies the man who gave the most.
So it's literally give your money away.
Money is part of it, but I think we can give a lot more than, because like, if I think of how can I provide the most value, if I write like the offers book that I wrote last year, and it's still like a #1, whatever, that I've gotten more messages and from the hundreds of thousands of people who bought and read and used the book than I could possibly influence with the tiny amount of money in comparison to the amount of good that way. And so I think, what are the highest leverage ways for me to provide goodwill to the marketplace? And a lot of that right now is either code or media, right? So like I can take, we have this time that we get to spend together, but then millions of people can hopefully benefit from the conversation, shift a perspective, gain a skill, et cetera, or hopefully maybe lead their child down a path that might not be the one. Right?
Hopefully we can help some more Jacobs. And let me just say, just to applaud you, I mean, we may never know the impact that Jacob will have. I mean,
it gets me stoked.
I know. I got goosebumps right now going, that's what it's about. We don't know yet what story Jacob's telling, and you just believing in this kid and being an advocate to his parents. I mean, this is real stuff. Because I do hope a lot of people watch this and get behind the layers with you. What was driving the old mission? I asked you what results matter to you, and you said, I've recently just changed my narrative. What was driving it to be all net worth? Where does that come from? Your background, voices in your life? What was driving that narrative before, that my net worth is the narrative?
I think it was an internal shift from fear to faith.
Wow.
Not in the traditional religious sense, but more so just it was fear driven. Fear, anger, whatever, but I think fear is usually at the core of it.
Fear of what?
Fear of not being good enough.
Where's that come from? Look at you, dude. You're busting out of your shirt. You're clearly a guy who goes hard after physical discipline. What's driving that?
So I still do have a Middle Eastern father. I was the only child, only son, no real mom, no siblings.
Okay.
So if you can imagine a very strong parent father with all of their world dreams put onto one person, right?
Wow.
There was no, and I'm very grateful for the upbringing that I had, but the results of that was never being good enough at anything. And so if I got a 99, it was, what did you miss? If I was varsity, it's like, well, did you start more minutes? Like whatever the thing was, there was always a goalpost that moved. And it took me a very long time to realize that the goalpost would always move.
Yes.
And so I still think I learned the innate traits of I wanted to become bulletproof. So that meant marrying the hottest girl. That meant being richer than everyone. That meant being in better shape than everyone. So that, and it wasn't, and at least for how I am built, it was not to loud over people. It was so that people would leave me alone.
Yeah.
So that no one could criticize me.
Wow.
Because it hurt. And so a lot of my life was building a fortress of being beyond rebuke. That no one could hold something to me because I could, by every objective measure, beat them. And I'm not trying to say that from a prideful place. It was from a place of trying to protect me.
Yeah, sure.
And so in real, in thinking through what are the, and we evolve through these things over time.
Sure.
In the beginning it was, make as much money as my dad, then it was make more money than my dad, then it was make more money than my dad's ever made his whole life. Again, it was, how can I get this even more bulletproof? Because when I made, I think it was $17 million in take-home income when I was 28, I told my dad and he said, well, we'll see how long it lasts. And so it was one of those things where I just wanted to win. I just wanted to win. And so what I realized was that I was winning a game that was set by someone else's rules.
Yes.
I was playing his game, not mine.
Yeah.
And so then when I was tasked, or at least I tasked myself with the idea of like, well, if I were to define a game, what rules would I make? It was a very different game. And so I think over the last probably 3-ish years, 36 months, which is not that long, I've been consistently kind of redefining this. And I would say recently I've had a more major shift in terms of my distillation of language or concision of language. It was just a shift from fear to faith that what I am doing, even if I do not monetize every aspect of the goodwill that we put out in the world, that's okay because the goal has changed.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, you nailed it. I mean, you went from protecting yourself, those are the words you used, to now it's about distribution. So from protection to distribution. And what a great shift that is in your heart. Wow, that's beautiful. Amazing stuff. I want to talk to you about another very important topic. I think we're probably very much in agreement. And if I could gather every young person in the room, this might, and I only had one message, this might be the message. And I'm going to tee you up. And actually the data bears it out. Harvard, of course, everybody knows Harvard. They've got the longest study ever done on relationships. They follow people from birth to death. People are still in the study and alive, of course. And one of the professors who was leading the study said this, that the study proved to them with data that is indisputable that 95% of our success or failure in life, Alex, is directly related to the people we spend the most time with. And of course, Jim Rohn, legendary motivational speaker, said, the people you spend, 5 people you spend the most time. So that's anecdotal as well. But the reality is when you think about failure in every area of our life, relationally, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, professionally, I mean, this is so true. And yet I feel like we walk around like zombies, just doing our thing, hanging with the people we hang with, and we don't take critical inventory of the people we spend the most time with. Thoughts on friends in your life, people around you? How guarded are you? And I don't mean like from a privacy standpoint, but I mean with your time.
No, so I am, and maybe it's because I'm still young, but I am pretty ruthless when it comes to the people that I have in my life.
Yeah.
And I tend to have a relatively contrarian view on relationships, which is that I do believe that all relationships are transactional. It sounds hard to say, but if you never got anything positive at some point, most humans will cease to continue the relationship. And so if we think about human behavior in terms of reinforcers and punishers, because those are the only two things, sticks and carrots, right? The people that we've had a longer period of time with, we are willing to wait a longer period of time before we are reinforced to continue to spend time with them. So we will wait longer periods of time before we get another carrot, which then kicks it out again, right? For the next carrot to come. And so for me, when I look at the relationships that I have, I try to cut off the backside, which is I don't want to keep a relationship because I have always had it. I don't want to give value to something because it has existed.
Mm-hmm.
but only insofar as it will continue to add value, and more so that it is aligned with where I want to go.
Right.
And so if I feel, at least as I see them, we either have people who are, or the people or actions we take are either going to get us closer or further from our goals. That is all. And so I want to stack the deck in my favor with the most amount of people who help me get the furthest or closest to my goals compared to other things. And so oftentimes, at least in my experience, the higher up I've gone on at least the material ladder of success, the fewer people can hang. And it's because of maybe their skills, their character traits, their beliefs. If I feel like I am overwhelmingly giving in the relationship and there's really not much that comes back over an extended period of time, my time to cut the relationship has just decreased over time.
Yeah.
And a lot of this, I think I read some studies of older people, because I like studying elderly a lot, because I think that they have some perspective.
Yes, they do.
To Gen Z, I feel like y'all should listen to old people.
They really should. Yeah.
But if you see a happiness curve on subjective well-being, it's actually like a smiley face. So people are happiest when they're like 10 years old.
Yep.
And then they go slow and steady down, where the valley of despair is like 45 to 55.
Wow.
And then they start to come up the other side once they get into elderly and retirement age. And one of the biggest things that they attributed it to is that the things that relationships and circumstances that people used to deal with or suffer through, they would say they literally didn't have time for that. They're like, I only have 10 years left. I don't have time for Susie. She's negative. She's always talking smack behind my back. Rather than keep this relationship, I just make more time for the people who don't. And I think that if I am going to be that way eventually, I might as well enjoy the benefits of making those types of decisions now, despite it not being in vogue.
Yep. Well, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, that's incredible. Let me ask you this. How would you define a person who would be called a friend of Alex? What do they need? What's that transaction need to look like between you and them?
Yeah, a high ratio of positive exchange per unit of time.
So fancy they need to lift you when you're around them, not suck the life out of you.
Per the amount of time like if I have a relationship that I only, we text once a quarter, and it's always something cool or something interesting, very low time investment, but low positive back, but still positive, right? So I think it's just the ratio of,
gotcha.
I mean, this is what you put in versus what you get out. So a friend would be somebody who has a high ratio of what I put in versus what I get out.
Exactly. But I mean, what would you say your circle of close friends is right now? What's the number? How many people, if I'm hanging out with you and I'm around you 30 days and I go, okay, he's got 3 close friends, he's got 5, 7, 10, what is it?
3.
Yeah. That's what the data shows. Let me ask you this. How many of those 3 close friends go way back more than 10 years?
None.
That's what I thought.
My wife's 7, if that counts.
No, it doesn't count. She's your wife. We can't. Yeah.
Well, then 2.
2. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, 2. And do you think that is healthy? Would you like it to be more? Is it just perfect?
I don't ascribe a label to it.
Good. So it just is what it is. It's the rhythm you're in and the pace you're running.
I enjoy the life that I have. And if I had no friends and I enjoyed the life that I have, that I would be fine with that. And if I had 20 friends, I would enjoy the life that I had. So I think a lot of mental duress comes from ascribing a positive. It's like the weather. Like is 2 rainy and is 5 sunny, or is it just, they just are that way? And this might also be a season of my life that I'm in a little bit more of a building season. Yeah. And I might not have as much extracurricular time that I can allocate towards friendship. So maybe my ratio for friends is higher now than it might be in the future. I don't know. I suspect it'll raise, honestly. And I just wanted to add one caveat to the friend comment. I believe, just like capitalism, where both people, one person buys and the other person gives a product and both people say thank you, that in an exchange with a friend, it is my hope that both of us are better off. It's not just like Alex taking, because then they would be justified in saying that they should. I would say you shouldn't be friends with me if I'm only taking from you. And so the hope is that, at least with the relationships that I have, that I frequent most often, that the exchange makes both of us better.
Yeah, I want to go. Let's go deeper on this, because I get this call a lot on the show. It sounds a little bit like this, and it's fun. I'm going to tee you up for what a call would be for me, and instead of me telling you what I say, I want to know what you say. All right. So it goes like this, Alex. I've got some tension with family members, and I know what I want to do. I know why I want to do it. But they're not very supportive. And it's killing me because it matters a lot to me. And I'm torn. My heart to do what I believe I'm supposed to do, but then my heart for my family. It's an open-ended, and of course I dig in. Where do you go with that question?
So I'd say first we have to define some terms. So the first one is, at least for me, is that love is defined as what you are willing to give up to maintain something, as I define it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, if you have a project car, if you've ever worked on a car or something for a long time, it's like, man, he must love that thing because he works on it forever and it doesn't do anything. Like, I'm willing to incur lots of cost before a carrot because I love something. I'm willing to sacrifice a lot in order to keep it. So I think the question for the person would be, which are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to sacrifice your dreams? Or are you willing to sacrifice a certain amount of influence that your family has over them? And so I think that if we can divorce, like, you can still have people, you can still have a relationship with people, but they don't necessarily need to be the majority of your time. And so if you have people who, I like fast forwarding because I'm a big frame guy. So it's like, if we're 85 years from now and all the people that were in your family who are older than you are now dead, because they will be, and you have not realized the dreams or even attempted to because of the fear of their judgment, how would you feel? Okay, scenario one. Scenario two, you do pursue those dreams and you don't have the family at the end of your life, but you did accomplish them. Which one do you feel better with? Now, there is a third path, which is you start pursuing the dream and then they change their opinions and catch up with you, which is the vast majority of the time.
That's correct.
Right? Because we'll be real. Materialism is a real thing. Status is a real thing. If you kill it, they will want you in their group.
That's right.
It's just that oftentimes it's the crab in the bucket scenario, where one crab wants to get away, and the fact that you're trying to spin out of the circle of mediocrity that they are in, you make them feel bad about themselves. And so that bad feeling they project back onto you, and it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
It's everything to do with them. And so for me, I am ruthless in terms of what I am willing to sacrifice for my goals, because I do, at least in my opinion, in my worldview, if I provide enough value, I will always have access to those people if I desire it.
I agree. I couldn't agree more, because I think what happens is if we choose temporary disappointment of the family member over long-term resentment.
Well said.
Then I think what's going to happen is they're going to say, all right, I'm disappointed, but I'm happy for you. And just like the crab, we pull them. And we've got to choose that, the gravitational pull that we can have on our loved ones.
Can I tell a quick story here?
Yeah, I want you to. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
And I think you said it way better than I did, by the way. I did everything that my dad was, told me to do. So I finished Vanderbilt in 3 years,
Wow.
With all the honors and all the stuff, and president of the fraternity. I was vice president of the powerlifting club. Like I did all the things, right? And then I got the swanky consulting job right out of college for 2 years. And I remember thinking, like, is this it? You know what I mean? Because I was 21 at this point. I'd graduated college. I had the good job. I had my own condo that I had bought because I'd saved the money. And I was looking out over the high rises, and I was like, is it just more of this? Is this it? And I knew that I was not satisfied with the job that I wanted. I knew that I wanted to start a business. And every time that I'd gone to tell my dad that that's what I wanted to do, he would end up talking me off the ledge and saying, no, we will go to business school, and then you'll go, back to the management, or you can go to investment banking if you want to do that. And then after that, you'll save some money, and then you can start a business. Right. And it got to the point where I was so incredibly depressed that I wanted to not wake up every day. So I would go to bed hoping that I wouldn't wake up. And and for me, many of the biggest decisions in my life have come down to life or death. And I say that only as a decision-making filter, not that, I was at this crossroads, but death, for whatever reason, is very motivating for me. And so the conclusion that I had to come to for me to make this move, despite my father, who had a tremendous amount of influence over me, especially at a younger age, was I can either die to him or I can die to me.
Wow.
And so I knew that by leaving this path and quitting and then starting a gym, which is kind of like the electrician job,
That's
a
right.
trade.
Yeah.
Especially in the Middle Eastern world where you can be a doctor, an accountant, me being in business was already like I was pre-med originally, I just convinced I hated medicine. I had no desire to have his life. Because his plan for me was that I was going to take over his practice. Sure. That was the whole deal. And it made sense on paper. The guy makes $1 million a year.
Yeah.
And, he's like, you could inherit it when you're 29, making $1 million a year. He's like, why would you not do and I get the argument.
Yeah.
But I would have been dead inside the entire time, and I would have been in prison for my whole life. And so when I did make that move, and this is for everybody who's looking for the happy ending, it did make a huge fissure, or a huge gap in our relationship.
Sure.
And for years, we barely spoke. And it was only after, not only that I had made more money and then made more money than he'd ever made, did the dynamic shift to one where he respected what I had done. And it took probably almost a decade, you know what I mean, for that to actually happen.
Yeah.
And so I will say that if you are going through this and you feel dead to yourself in the current existence, in the current path, it will not get better. You will only have put more time in burning time of your own life that is limited.
That's right.
To fill someone else's dream. And it was his dream of what he wanted for my life as it reflected on him as a parent.
Oh, yeah.
And I get where he was coming from. So it's like you can understand why they have this belief, and then yet also disagree with it and act in according to your belief. And so that it's just it's very real for me because I went through that. It was very, very, very hard for me. Yeah. It was probably the hardest. It was the hardest decision in my life, was disobeying my father, because it was like disobeying. It wasn't just like I was being disobedient. And then doing this on my own. And I to show how much influence my dad had over me, I only called him to tell him I was doing this when I was 6 states away. I started driving. I was in Ohio or something, and I called him to tell him that I had gone. And he said, "Hey, just come back for lunch. We'll talk it over." Because it was always the same thing. Alexander, because that's what he calls me. Alexander's having one of his little fits about life. He'll come back. I'll talk him out of it. I was like, "I'm gone." He was like, and then the flip switch. Then it was like, "Wow, you got to be so crazy. You're always so extreme. You always have to, all these things." And it stayed like that for a while. But like at that point, then that was where the fear came from, where the fear of him being right. And then that was the big driver for a very long time, was that even when things were so hard for me because they were very difficult for me in the beginning, I would rather have died than let him be right. I could not accept an existence where I would have to come back with my tail between my legs. And then, because what would have happened is if I had not succeeded there, I would have basically had to become his slave for the rest of my life. At least that's how I saw my life playing out. If I had not been able to make this work. And so I did everything. I just couldn't go back to that.
Oh, it's a powerful motivator, but man, it sucked for you. And parents, I mean, I don't know who's watching this, but if you got a little one, I hope you rewind that story, because I think that the parental fear can turn into a nightmare for our kids. And luckily for you, maybe not luck, depending on I don't believe in luck on this situation, but the way you were wired, it turned you into a diamond. Yeah. But I just want to call out, and I know this is heavy for the audience, but there are a lot of kids that aren't wired like Alex, and that can destroy their life. You talk about big time depression. I mean, just crazy amounts of soul crushing stuff. So parents, we got to be careful here to not crush our kids' soul. I'm glad it worked out for you.
As am I. And, Dad, love you.
No, we love, And by the way, let me just say, none of this is dishonoring your father, because he's just as normal as every other American. But this is not a Middle Eastern thing. This isn't your dad thing. This is the normal pressure that parents feel, and we've got to call it out, because it comes back full circle to the discussion we had earlier about college and pushing kids into stuff.
And if there's another even wrinkle on this, I think understanding the motivation of the person who's influencing you to stay put is useful. Because once you can I think Pascal said, to understand is to forgive.
Yeah, that's right.
And so for me, when I understood that my father and I had the same goals for my life, he wanted me to be successful. I wanted me to be successful. It was just we wanted to get there in different ways. And there's only one of us that actually has to go through it. And so I felt like my opinion mattered more. And so I think that if we can delineate those things, it is helpful in understanding that they are not adversaries. They actually want your best. This is me all half talking to the kids. Yeah. They want your best, but sometimes, and to the parents, the kid also wants their own best. You know what I mean? And they might know they haven't shared with you, or they were afraid to share it with you. And in so doing, you might actually have an incomplete picture. They did just as a fun side note, they did a survey on political beliefs between whether they're inherited, with kids and parents. What was funny is that I think it was like 45% of kids weren't actually sure of their parents' political beliefs when they actually were asked to name them.
Of course.
And then 75% of parents didn't know their kids' beliefs. And so we think that we know so much about these people that we spend all this time with. And yet on the things that matter most, the harder conversations, we know very little.
So true. And so much could be dealt with easier if we sat down and parents shared their fears with their kids and the kids shared their fears. And boy, it's so good. Alex, I recently read that 7 million American men aged 25 to 54 are not working, and it's on purpose. It's not because they were laid off or fired. They're choosing not to work. And I study this every day because I'm focused on the world of work, helping people do work they love, and then cover it from all angles. And so there's been economists are just scratching their head for the last 2 years coming out of the pandemic as we've seen the jobs gap, right? Where you had, right now I think it's about 10.3 million jobs available, posted jobs, and then a little bit over 8 million unemployed, and that's down from 11. So we had this huge job gap. Well, now we're starting to see what's going on. 7 million men in America, all right, are choosing not to work. Now, you're a numbers guy, so we look at this and we go, okay, some of these they've done well, right? Maybe in their 40s or 50s and they're cashed out. They're doing it. And you got some are living in their basement with mom and dad, right? Some are falling on hard times. I mean, there's a big group of people here, so I don't want to be too general, but at the same time, I don't mind telling you I think this is a crisis. I think it's a crisis. I think it's a soul level crisis for the majority of those 7 million. Does that concern you when you hear that? Do you have thoughts on why you think that is? The way we look at work, the way that you and I both believe that we were created to contribute through our work. I believe that. Thoughts on that number? Because I was honestly, I gasped. And who uses that word anymore? For all you young people, that's GASPED. It's an old term, right? I emotionally was just like, whoa, 7 million dudes. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think I would love to know the psychographics of the 7 million. So, I mean, sure, there's the retired folks, who cashed out, whatever.
Right.
And then I think there's probably a subcamp. Now, are these people getting unemployment or are they just getting nothing?
No, they're not getting unemployment. They are just not in the system at all. They're just like happily not working, or I don't know if I could use that phrase. I don't think that's true.
So that brings up, I would imagine, two camps. So one, because they're being supported somehow.
That's right.
So they're either being supported, if it's not through government, then they're being supported by family or a spouse.
That's right.
In the other camp, you've got people who are being supported by, I would say, I'll say you've got the spouse supported ones, and then you've got the family supported ones who don't.
That's exactly right.
So if you were to look at those two things, I actually think that despite the fact that the stay-at-home dad with the breadwinning mom has a use case, and then the other, and the basement mom, mom's basement kid, and I'm probably gonna get a lot of flack for this. Caleb's more like, I might get a lot of flack for this. But I actually think it has stems all the way down to masculinity in general and how it's being redefined. And this is, again, I'm not the big labeler of good or bad. I'm just kind of saying at least what I observe is that I think being a man and working and providing 30 years ago, 50 years ago, were inextricably linked. Being a man and providing for your family were one and the same.
That's right.
One was a requisite for the other. You cannot call yourself a man if you do not provide for your family. That narrative has shifted. And so I think that in the spouse, the wife works, dad stays at home. There are arguments for that. I'm very conservative when it comes to how I like to live my life with my wife, et cetera. I don't imagine a world where I would not be the provider ever. It's just, and again, I was raised with very conservative Middle Eastern values. So that's innate to my DNA, good or bad, who knows? But I think based on my experience, men are built to work. That's that.
That's right.
On the other side with mom's basement, right? I think that there's an entire subset of men who feel completely hopeless and disheartened and feel like the system is out to get them. Now, there's the other side of the aisle that says, if you're a man, you're born with all of these privileges and blah, 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 blah. We can say whatever we want. In my opinion, human suffering feels the same if you were the one suffering.
That's right.
And so a 10 out of 10 pain for one person from being beat up by their dad versus a 10 out of 10 pain for being sexually abused by an uncle. I'm just getting real here. 10 out of 10 still feels like 10 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we could make an argument that maybe just being physically abused, getting beat up versus being sexually abused, you'd rather be physically abused if you had the pick, right?
Right.
But I think in terms of how humans experience reality, pain is pain. And so we like to objectify things and quantify them. But I think that for that subset, they still feel like they're being told all the time that they have these advantages and yet aren't succeeding. And so it's easier for the ego to say, I'm not going to try because at least now I'm not failing.
That's exactly right.
And so I think a lot of people have opted out because the pain of failure is too great for them. And because they feel like the chips are stacked against them and they feel their self-esteem is rock bottom because they can't keep promises to themselves. Right. And so they continue to perpetuate that. And I do think it's a massive problem. And I think that, again, as contrarian as this is, I think guys, especially younger guys, need a lot of help. And I think there's a lot of anger.
They do.
And I think that like the proliferation of like Andrew Tate and some of those types of characters, I think that what they did was they gave a voice to some of that disenfranchised group. It wasn't like eliminating Tate doesn't eliminate the root, which is that a lot of men feel emasculated. They feel disrespected. Yeah. And to be fair, they are not worthy of respect because they have not done anything respectable. And so it's a bit of a chicken and the egg problem, but like someone needs to start the flame to say like, if you want the respect, you have to do the stuff that gets you it. As much as we could say, I wish the world gave unconditional love, I wish the world gave unconditional respect, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. And so rather than lamenting the way the world is, we can see it for what it is and then play within those boundaries.
I think you and I are probably both big on personal responsibility, right? So I don't want to in any way confuse, but I want to address what you said, Alex, because I think you're right. But I think a lot of the problem lies on the first and second floor, not the grown-up kid in the basement on his screens getting the dopamine. And I think what's happened is that we have bubble wrapped our kids to the point where the fear of failure is actually way worse than the failure itself.
We have this. So there was a little study that said that it takes about 20 hours to become. You get the most amount of gains in a new skill in the first 20 hours. Mm-hmm. Like if learning it, you want to learn the guitar, you want to learn to sing, you want to learn a cold call, first 20 hours, you get by percentage of skill acquisition, you get the most in that first 20. The problem is that people will wait years to start the first hour.
That's correct.
Because they're so afraid of the pain of not being good enough because they expect for everything to be easy. And I think it circles back to what we said at the very beginning.
That's it. I mean, and that to me is the crisis. And certainly you addressed a lot of issues. It's not all one thing, but my goodness, I think it's not popular to say what you said anymore. I'm glad you said it, but there is inherently in a man a craving. Men and women are different, and I don't think that's controversial to say. But there's a craving. There's a craving in a man to go do something, and so we're seeing a lot of this now. Where they've never been pushed, they've never been challenged to do anything, and it's a big, scary world out there.
And so I study a lot of human behavior stuff because I think it's really interesting, for motivating workforces, persuading, et cetera. And so I have the belief that all humans are addicted. Everyone's addicted. And the question is, what are we addicted to? And so like I am addicted to the dopamine rush that I get, or the serotonin, whatever, from lots of grit and then payoff, right? So I know, I understand that cycle well. And so I like to play it as many times as I can. I think that with some of this 7 million that you're talking about, they also have an addiction, but they got addicted to something that was not pro-social or was not pro-work. And so to your point about the video games in the basement, they are addicted to that. And they do get dopamine. They do get their dopamine in a way that is superior to anything that happens in the real world. And it's being enabled by the parents that continue to subsidize that addiction.
Yeah, so true. Wow, good stuff there. All right, I want to give you the final word here. Just a fun question. I love to ask a lot of my guests, right? How would you describe your demographic, your core audience? What would you say they are?
Probably 25 to 35-year-old males.
All right, that's 90%. Yeah, that's certainly mine on YouTube, which is YouTube in general. So let's say you're talking to every 25 to 35-year-old dude in the world. All right, you got the loudspeaker, maybe you got the old classic, horn, and you're talking to them one message. Only one. from your guts today, what do you tell them?
You must pick a goal and do so much work that it would be unreasonable for you not to succeed. That if you were to look back, having done an amount of work that it would be virtually impossible for you to fail, that you said, I did that. And I can promise you that if you do that level of work, that volume of activity over an extended period of time, and to quote Neil Strauss, without thinking you're smarter than you are, you will probably get there in half the time. But you have to start, and you have to start that first hour and not wait a decade to get there.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Alex Hormozi. And if you took away as much as I did, I know that you're going to do something this week with that information. Reminder, if you enjoy the show and these conversations, like, share, and subscribe.